30 people sat in that room. 30 executives in press suits and Harvard frames and shoes that cost more than most of their employees made in a week. The boardroom at Halcyon Defense Systems sat 40 feet above the streets of Arlington, Virginia. Glass on 3 sides, the Pentagon visible through the east window on a clear day. It was a clear day. A $2 billion contract lay on the table. The ink was barely dry, signed, sealed, and waiting for one final approval. A live demonstration that the system could hold, that it was unbreakable, that the United States military could trust it with the real-time communications of 14 bases, 400,000 service members, and the kind of secrets that end wars before they start. The system had a name: Sentinel-X. The man who built it stood at the head of the table. Hollis Crane, founder, CEO, the kind of man who wore his own name embroidered on his shirt sleeves and meant it as a brand, not a vanity. He was 58, silver hair, and he was smiling. "Bring him in," Crane said. A young man walked through the glass door. 23 years old, dark skin, a thrift store button-down tucked into a pair of slacks that fit just well enough to pass for professional. No cufflinks, no lanyard, no folder. No resume thick enough to impress the man already holding a $2 billion pen. The room shifted. A few smiles, a few muffled laughs. Someone near the back whispered something, and the whisper moved, the way whispers do in rooms where everyone has already decided what they're looking at. Crane set a slim black laptop on the table in front of the young man. Sentinel-X, the real one, live, connected to the 14 bases right now. One condition, Crane said. He said it to the room, not to the kid. The room was his audience. "Hack this, tonight, on this stage, in front of everyone, and I'll sign the whole company over to you." The laugh started in the corner. It rolled. It grew shoulders. The young man looked up at Crane. He didn't smile back. He didn't flinch. He looked at him the way you look at a man who has just handed you something he doesn't know he's holding. "Done," he said. A phone rings. Sunrise. Not in Arlington, somewhere quieter. A voice on the other end, clipped, official, used to being obeyed. "This is the Pentagon. We need to speak with the young man who just breached your system." The voice pauses. "All of your system?" The name on the contract was Kareem Bishop. 23 years old, born in East Baltimore. Raised after the age of 12 by no one and by everyone. Foster care, 3 homes in 5 years. A guidance counselor at Dunbar High who once told him he was too quiet to be smart, and a math teacher named Mr. Pierce, who, 3 weeks later, watched him solve a college-level proof on a chalkboard and didn't say a word. He just handed Kareem a library card and a copy of a book called Hacking: The Art of Exploitation. That was the night Kareem stopped being a kid who played with computers and started being a kid who spoke their language. He was 16 the first time he won the National Cyber Patriot Challenge, a nationwide competition. 40,000 students. The final round was held at a convention center outside D.C. The 3 students he beat in the finals were from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. They had mentors. They had equipment. They had parents in the audience. Kareem had a borrowed blazer and a chaperone from his foster agency who got lost on the way to the venue. He won anyway. 3 scholarship offers came in, full rides, the kind of letters that changed the trajectory of a life. Kareem read every one of them twice, then sat at a desk in his group home and tried to figure out how to accept. He couldn't. The forms required a family cosigner, a parent, a legal guardian with a tax return and a credit score, and a paper trail that made sense. Kareem had a caseworker who changed every 9 months. The scholarships were still good. The door, somehow, was locked. He turned them all down. After high school, he took a job at a phone repair kiosk in a mall in Towson. 43 internship applications went out. 42 came back with a polite, "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." The 43rd, a defense contractor in Northern Virginia, sent an offer letter with a single line at the bottom that read, "You are being considered as part of our diversity pipeline initiative." Kareem stared at that line for a long time. In 2026, that line existed on borrowed time. Court rulings had been stacking up. State legislatures had begun drafting bills. The words diversity and pipeline had started to sound, to some ears, like the kind of language that gets scrubbed from websites by the end of the fiscal year. Kareem didn't know if the program would survive the year. He didn't care. It was the only door that had opened. He took the job. He showed up on his first Monday at Halcyon Defense Systems carrying a single backpack and wearing a gray lanyard. The same gray lanyard the cleaning crew wore. But Crane never read the resume. He never read the line about the diversity pipeline. He never read the letter from the National Cyber Patriot Challenge. He saw a face that didn't match the door he wanted it to match. And that, in Crane's world, was the end of the conversation. The first day at Halcyon, Kareem Bishop was shown to a desk on the 3rd floor. A folding table, actually. The kind they used to set up for visiting consultants. It was wedged between a fire exit and a janitor's closet. The monitor was an older model. The chair wobbled. His supervisor was a man named Troy Ellsworth, mid-30s, 6 years at Halcyon, the kind of engineer who had learned to survive by never being the loudest name in the room. Troy pointed at the desk, said, "Your login is in your inbox," and was gone before Kareem could ask a question. The inbox, when Kareem opened it, contained exactly 4 messages: a welcome packet, a benefits overview, a calendar invite to a town hall 3 weeks out, and a single sentence from an unknown sender routed through the internal security alias. "Welcome, intern. Don't break anything." Kareem smiled at that. It was the first time anyone at Halcyon had spoken to him like a person. He started working. The gray lanyard opened certain doors: the lobby, the 3rd floor break room, the server room only when accompanied, the executive suites, never, the classified operations floor, never. The badge, in the language of a defense contractor, was a sentence. And the sentence Kareem had been handed read, more or less, "You are welcome to be invisible here." He didn't complain. On his second night, alone on the 3rd floor at 9:47 p.m., Kareem opened a routine firmware file, a small one, part of a routine update package scheduled to roll out to 14 military bases the following month. He was supposed to be looking for documentation errors, typos, inconsistencies. What he found in the last 4% of the file was something else: a dormant signature, a piece of code that didn't match anything in the rest of the build. It wasn't malicious exactly. It didn't do anything visible. It just waited. It sent a quiet beacon outward once every 72 hours to an external address disguised as a benign update server. The address traced back through 3 layers of proxy. The signal was tiny, designed to be tiny. Kareem sat back in the wobbling chair. He ran the signature against Sentinel-X's known architecture. It fit. It fit perfectly, like a key cut for one specific lock. It was a back door, and it was already in the live network, already talking, already in. He wrote a report, 14 pages, detailed, cautious. He flagged it for the security operations team. He CC'd his supervisor, Troy. He CC'd the senior analyst listed at the bottom of the org chart, a woman named Patricia Monroe, whose name appeared above the line Cybersecurity Oversight, Senior Lead. He hit send at 11:14 p.m. He went home to a studio apartment that cost $740 a month, slept 4 hours, and came back in the morning expecting a response. He didn't get one. By noon, there was a meeting on his calendar, not about the report, about him, a check-in with Troy. Troy told him, very kindly, very evenly, that the team appreciated his enthusiasm, but that as an intern, he was expected to focus on the documentation tasks assigned to him and not to perform independent security analysis on production firmware. Kareem blinked. He tried to explain. The dormant signature, the beaconing, the 14 bases. Troy held up a hand. "Resubmit if you'd like," he said, "through the proper channels." The proper channels were the same channels Kareem had already used, but Kareem understood. He understood exactly. He was 23 years old. He had been at Halcyon for one day, and the man across the desk was telling him, without saying it, that the report wasn't the problem. The report was fine. The problem was the lanyard. Kareem went back to his folding table. He resubmitted. He waited. The report was bounced back. Unverified sender. He waited. 3 days passed. He noticed on the 4th day that the bounce back had been processed manually by someone inside the building, and that the manual override had originated from an IP address belonging to the executive floor. 16 days. For 16 days, Kareem Bishop walked into Halcyon Defense Systems, sat at his folding table, wore his gray lanyard, and waited for someone to read his report. The firmware update window was 12 days away. The signature was still beaconing. Every 72 hours, a quiet pulse went out from Sentinel X to an address no one in the building seemed to want to talk about. Kareem did what interns are told to do. He did his documentation work. He attended the team meetings. He smiled in the elevator. He ate lunch alone at a table near the back of the cafeteria where the cleaning staff also ate, because no one else seemed inclined to share a table with the kid in the gray lanyard. But at night, after the 3rd floor emptied out, he kept working. He traced the external address through 2 more proxy layers. He found a vendor, a third-party firmware supplier named Ardent Microsystems, whose code was bundled into Sentinel X's update layer. Ardent's CEO had been on a single panel with a known cutout shell company in Eastern Europe. The signatures matched a style of attack that had been written about in technical journals under a different name. He had read about an attack just like this one. Sunburst, solar winds, the year 2020. Nation-state actors had slipped a backdoor into a routine software update and walked, undetected, into the United States Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and dozens of private defense contractors. The breach had lived for months before anyone noticed. What Kareem was looking at was the same shape, the same fingerprint, the same quiet patience. Only this time, the backdoor wasn't an accounting platform. It was in a live military communication system, currently moving real-time data for 14 U.S. bases. He wrote a second report, 22 pages this time. He attached packet captures, he attached hash comparisons, he attached a timeline. He CC'd the head of engineering, a man named Dale Mercer. He hit send at 2:08 a.m. By morning, his CC had been stripped from the record. The report, the second one, the longer one, the one with the packet captures, was gone. Not bounced, not declined. Gone, as if it had never existed, as if Kareem Bishop had never sat down at his folding table and written a single line. He called Patricia Monroe's extension from a hallway phone. She picked up on the 4th ring. "This is Patricia." "Miss Monroe, this is Kareem Bishop. I'm the intern on the 3rd floor. I submitted a report to your alias 4 days ago. I resubmitted. I CC'd Dale Mercer. A pause, a long one. "I know who you are," Patricia said. Her voice was low, controlled, the voice of a woman who had learned over 22 years at 3 different defense contractors exactly how loud to speak in a building with thin walls. "I saw your report, Kareem. I read it twice." He felt something loosen in his chest, relief maybe, or the beginning of it. "Then why?" "Because I don't have the rank to back it up," she said. "And because the people who do have the rank have decided, for reasons I am not allowed to ask about, that the report does not exist." Silence. "But," she said, and her voice shifted just a little, just enough. The firmware update window is in 11 days, and the signature is still beaconing. And I see it too. She hung up. Kareem stood in that hallway for a long time. The fluorescent light above him buzzed. Somewhere on the executive floor, a door opened and closed. 16 days, and the only person in the building who had read the report was a woman too afraid to forward it. The only person who had seen the threat was a kid in a gray lanyard. And the update window was closing. That night, an all-hands email went out to every employee at Halcyon from the CEO's office with a subject line that read, "Live demonstration, 3 weeks, mandatory attendance." 300 people filled the auditorium on the top floor of Halcyon Defense Systems. 300 employees in the company's signature polo shirts, navy blue with a small Halcyon crest over the heart. The stage was set up like a TED Talk. A podium, a massive screen, a single terminal, open and waiting. Hollis Crane walked out at 10 a.m. sharp. He was in his element. He was always in his element in front of a crowd. He told the story of Halcyon's founding. He told the story of the Sentinel-X contract. He talked about the trust the Pentagon had placed in the company. He talked about the rigor of the engineering. He talked about the unimpeachable security of the system. He paused. "I want to talk to you about vigilance," he said. He let the word hang. Vigilance is not a slogan. It's a culture. And culture is not a thing you write in a handbook. It's a thing you enforce. He gestured off stage. A young man walked out. Gray lanyard. Thrift store button-down. The same young man who, 16 days earlier, had been told to stick to documentation. The room shifted the way it had shifted in the boardroom. Smiles, whispers, a few muffled laughs. Crane didn't stop them. He let them roll, the way you let a wave carry you. "This," Crane said, "is one of our interns." The laughs grew shoulders. "This young man, on his first day, submitted a report to our security team claiming he had identified a critical vulnerability in Sentinel-X." Crane let out a small, performative laugh. A vulnerability that, if it were real, and I want to be very clear, the best engineers in the country assure me it is not real, would compromise the security of 14 U.S. military installations. A ripple of applause. The kind of applause that says, "Thank God someone is finally in charge." "So," Crane said. He stepped down from the podium. He walked to the terminal. He set his hand on it. "I have a proposition in front of everyone, a demonstration, a test, live, on this stage, tonight." He turned to face Kareem. "Hack this," he said. "Right here, in front of 300 of your colleagues. If you can do it, I will sign the entire company over to you. Every share, every contract, every patent." He spread his hands. "But you won't. Because it can't be done." The room clapped. The room roared. It was the kind of roar that, in any other context, would have been a kindness to mistake for applause. But it wasn't applause. It was a verdict delivered in real time by 300 people in matching polos on a young man in a thrift store button-down who hadn't said a single word. Crane turned back to the audience. He was enjoying himself. He let the moment cook. Kareem looked at the terminal. He looked at the screen. He looked at the 300 faces in front of him. He looked at Crane. And then he looked past Crane, for just a second, at a woman in the fourth row. Patricia Monroe, senior analyst, cybersecurity oversight. The woman who had read the report twice and stayed quiet for 16 days. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was unreadable. But her eyes were begging him. Kareem turned back to Crane. "I'll need the room cleared," he said, "after the demonstration is complete. And I'll need access to the full Sentinel-X architecture, not the demonstration sandbox." Crane blinked. The first time in a long time that Hollis Crane had blinked without an answer ready. "The architecture is classified," Crane said. "Then it's a good thing I have a clearance level," Kareem said quietly. Crane stared at him. The room waited. "Fine," Crane said. "You have until midnight." The applause this time was smaller, confused, the kind of applause that doesn't know what it's applauding. Kareem sat down at the terminal at 11:47 p.m. The room had been thinned to essential personnel, engineers, security leads, Patricia, and Crane himself, watching from the back row with his arms folded. The screen glowed. The cursor blinked, and Kareem typed the first line of code. He didn't start with the firewall. The firewall was a decoy. Every great fortress has one, a wall so tall and so visible that it convinces the enemy to spend their energy on it. Sentinel-X's firewall was a masterpiece. It would have stopped every red team in the country for at least a week. It had been audited by the NSA. It had been certified by 3 different independent firms. It was, by every measurable standard, unbreakable. Kareem didn't touch it. He went around it. A supply chain backdoor doesn't need to break the wall. It needs to be inside the wall before the wall is built. It needs to be in the brick, in the mortar, in the part of the foundation that no one thinks to inspect, because the engineer who poured the foundation was trusted. The engineer was certified. The engineer had been vetted. The engineer in this case was a third-party vendor. Ardent Microsystems, a small firm in Austin, Texas, that had supplied the firmware update layer for Sentinel-X. Their code was bundled into every release. Their engineers had read access to the production environment. Their CEO had signed a compliance attestation that no foreign entity had any ownership stake in the company. The attestation was a lie. Kareem didn't know that yet. Not fully. He knew the shape of the lie, the proxy layers, the beacon signature, the timing. What he didn't know, until he cracked the second proxy at the 9-minute mark, was who was on the other end of the beacon. At 10:42 p.m., Kareem had reached the dormant signature. It was a beautiful piece of code. He could admit that in the privacy of his own head without ever saying it out loud. It was elegant. It was patient. It was a piece of work that had taken years to develop. And Kareem understood, in the way that only someone who had spent his life learning the grammar of machines could understand, that this was not the work of a single hacker. This was the work of a nation. At 10:58 p.m., he isolated the beacon. He watched it pulse. 72 hours, quiet, patient, pulling a tiny thread of metadata from each of the 14 bases. Nothing classified. Not yet. The signature was in its learning phase, mapping the network, identifying high-value targets, building a picture. At 11:01 p.m., he breached the perimeter of the live architecture. The room went silent. Crane, in the back row, unfolded his arms. At 11:08 p.m., Kareem had administrative access to the system, full read, full write. He could have done anything. He could have shut the system down. He could have leaked the contract details. He could have walked out of the building and into the kind of federal interrogation room that doesn't have a clock on the wall. He didn't do any of that. At 11:09 p.m., he began to map the back door. At 11:11 p.m., he isolated the firmware update layer and pulled the entire Ardent Microsystems code contribution into a single window on the screen. The room could see it now, lines and lines of code with the dormant signature highlighted in red. A long, quiet, patient spider sitting at the center of the web. At 11:13 p.m., Kareem stopped typing. He stood up. He turned to face Crane. "Now," he said quietly, "let me show you the part I wasn't supposed to find." The room didn't breathe. Crane didn't move. Kareem turned back to the terminal. He pulled up a second window, a third, a fourth, a timeline, a packet capture, a signature comparison to a known nation-state attack pattern, Sunburst, the solar winds breach that had compromised the United States Department of State 5 years earlier. The same fingerprint, the same patient architecture, the same quiet 7-year-old lie. Kareem turned to the room. "Sentinel X is compromised," he said. "The back door has been live for 19 months. It is currently beaconing. It is currently mapping the network. The next phase, based on the Sunburst playbook, is exfiltration. That phase begins in approximately 30 days. He paused. 14 military bases, he said. 400,000 service members. Real-time communications. Everything moves through this system. He looked at Crane. Everything. The room didn't applaud this time. The room didn't clap. The room made the sound a room makes when it finally understands what it has been standing inside. A hand rose, slowly. In the fourth row, Patricia Monroe, senior analyst, cybersecurity oversight. The woman who had read the report twice and stayed quiet for 16 days. She stood up. "I knew," Patricia said. The room turned. Her voice didn't shake. She had practiced this, Kareem realized. She had rehearsed it. The words came out the way words come out when they have been carried in someone's chest for 16 days and have finally been allowed to land. "I saw the report. The first one. I read it twice. I saw the second one. I saw the CC to Dale Mercer. I knew the firmware update window was closing. I knew the signature was beaconing." She looked at the back row, at the men in pressed shirts, at the executive floor, watching from a glass-walled conference room above the auditorium. "I stayed quiet," she said. She took a breath. "I am 47 years old. I have spent 22 years in this industry. I have a mortgage. I have a son in college. I have a clearance that, if it is revoked, ends a career I have spent my entire adult life building." She paused. "I stayed quiet because I did not believe a system I had spent 22 years learning to trust would, in fact, fail." She looked at Kareem. "I was wrong. He was right. And I will not be quiet again." She sat down. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it. The kind of silence that comes after a war, not before one. The kind of silence that, in a courtroom, follows a verdict. Kareem stood at the terminal. He looked at the screen. He looked at the room. He looked at Patricia. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room had heard her. At 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before his deadline, Crane's phone rang. The ringtone was a default. The kind of ringtone that hasn't been changed in years, because the person who owns the phone never answers unknown numbers. Crane answered, a voice on the other end, clipped, official, used to being obeyed. "This is the Pentagon. We need to speak with the young man who just breached your system." A pause. "All of your system." Crane's face went the color of old paper. At midnight, the auditorium emptied out in a way that auditoriums are not supposed to empty out. No applause, no closing remarks, no HR follow-up emails about culture and vigilance. Just the soft, heavy thud of 300 pairs of shoes walking out of a building that had just learned what had been standing inside. Crane was escorted to a small conference room on the second floor. 2 men in suits who had not been introduced. A phone call. A long one. He was placed on administrative leave before sunrise. The federal contract was frozen. 3 senior engineers were taken in for questioning before lunch. The back door, in the days that followed, was traced to a compromised third-party vendor, a shell company, an Eastern European cutout, a patient piece of architecture that had lived inside Halcyon Defense Systems for 19 months without being seen. It had been seen. It had been documented. It had been reported. The report had been deleted by a man who did not want to read it, and it had been seen 16 days later by a woman who had finally stopped being quiet. But the person who had found it, the person who had walked into Halcyon Defense Systems with a thrift store button down and a gray lanyard and a single borrowed blazer and no one in his corner, was now standing alone on the top floor of an empty building, watching the sun come up over Arlington. At 6:14 a.m., a security officer approached him. She didn't speak. She held out a pair of scissors. She cut the gray lanyard from his neck. In its place, she clipped a red lanyard. DoD Emergency Red Access, reclassified under Emergency Clearance Authority. The kind of access that does not exist on an org chart. The kind of access that is granted in the language of the United States Department of Defense when a system has been compromised at the level where the normal hierarchy cannot be trusted. The red lanyard, in the language of a defense contractor, was not a sentence. It was a paragraph. The next 48 hours moved the way the next 48 hours move after a thing like this, fast and slow at the same time. The Pentagon convened. The federal contract was reopened under emergency review. The third-party vendor was audited. The shell company was traced. The nation-state signature was confirmed. Kareem Bishop, in those 48 hours, slept for a total of 9 hours. He was interviewed by federal agents. He was debriefed by NSA liaisons. He sat in a room with a man he would later learn was a 4-star general, and he explained calmly, in a voice that had been trained by a cafeteria worker in East Baltimore, exactly what he had found and exactly how he had found it. On the third day, he was offered a job. Task Force Meridian, a classified DoD Red Team, the kind of unit that simulates nation-state attacks against live U.S. military infrastructure, the kind of unit that does not, in any official document, exist by name, but that exists in practice as one of 3 new Pentagon organizations created in the last 2 years specifically to recruit, train, and deploy the kind of talent that finds things other people miss. Kareem accepted, on one condition. He wanted to build something first, not a system, not a tool, not a backdoor, a program, a pipeline. A way in for the next Kareem Bishop, the next kid from East Baltimore, the next kid from the group home, the next kid who had won the National Cyber Patriot Challenge and then watched the scholarships evaporate because he didn't have a parent with a tax return. The After Dark Initiative, a partnership between Halcyon Defense Systems, the Department of Defense, 3 HBCUs, and a national foster care scholarship network. A real program, a real pipeline. A real door that stayed open, regardless of what the courts decided about the word diversity. A door with a key that didn't require a parent, a cosigner, or a paper trail that made sense. Kareem designed the program in a week. He wrote the charter himself. He named the first cohort of 43 students, 43 for the 43 internship applications that had come back with the word no, and he signed the funding letter on the same day he signed his own employment contract with Task Force Meridian. Crane, in the weeks that followed, resigned from Halcyon Defense Systems. He did so quietly. He did so in a way that produced a single, brief press release and no further comment. The company, in the months that followed, was restructured. The board was replaced. The third-party vendor contracts were rewritten. The gray lanyards were, eventually, retired, replaced by a badge system that did not, by its color, announce the rank of the person wearing it. Patricia Monroe kept her job. She asked in writing for the new badge system to include a clear, written anti-retaliation clause. The clause was added. It was the first thing she had ever asked Halcyon for in 22 years that had not been ignored. The cemetery in East Baltimore is small. It's the kind of cemetery that doesn't appear on maps. The headstones are weathered. The grass grows long in the summer. There's a chain-link fence around it and a gate that doesn't lock. Kareem's mother is buried in the 3rd row, Naomi Bishop. She died when Kareem was 11. She was 43. She had worked for 19 years in the cafeteria of a public elementary school, the same school Kareem had attended as a child. She had taught him chess on a torn paperboard using bottle caps for the missing pieces. She had never won a game against him. She had never tried to. "The queen always gets sacrificed," she told him once, in a kitchen that smelled like boiled greens and dish soap. That's her job, to buy time for the king to escape. She was wrong about that, but she hadn't lived long enough to see it. Kareem knelt at the headstone. He was wearing a dark suit, a real one this time, not a thrift store button-down. The red lanyard was tucked into his inside pocket. He set a chess piece on the headstone. The Queen. "You told me the Queen always gets sacrificed," he said. "I think you were wrong about that." The wind picked up. The grass moved. He stayed there a long time. Then he stood up. He brushed off his knees. He looked at the headstone. He looked at the Queen. He walked away. That story is fictional, but the architecture of it is real. The firmware backdoor, the supply chain compromise, the junior analyst whose report gets ignored, the boardroom that laughs before it understands, the cemetery in East Baltimore, the kid from the group home who wins the championship and then can't cash the check. Every piece of it maps to a documented moment in the last 5 years. SolarWinds, F5, the HBCU pipeline programs, the foster care scholarship networks, the way a clear yes can be turned into a quiet no by a missing signature on a form. The world is full of Kareem Bishops. Kids who can see the back door. Kids who can read the report. Kids who can find the thing no one else is looking for. And who, instead of being handed a red lanyard, are handed a gray one and told to stick to documentation. Some of them keep going anyway. If this story stayed with you, really stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The link is in the description. Subscribe if you want stories like this one, told slowly, told honestly, and told all the way through. I'll be here for the next one.